Hi everyone, we are going to learn Spring Boot. In this session, basically we are going to know how we can make a REST API using a Spring Boot application. We are on the Spring Boot page and as you can see, the documentation also tells us that Spring Boot makes it easy to create standalone application, which is a production grade Spring based application that you can just run. It simply means while building a web based application, we have to do a lot of configurations. Spring Boot is a Java based framework that is built on the top of Spring framework, which simplifies the work of developing web-based application. What does it mean? It simply means you don't have to do so much of configurations like taking care of servers, writing configurations, creating objects. This whole thing is just given to you using a Spring Boot. You can see there are so many features of a Spring Boot listed here. You can read the line number 3, provide opinionated starter dependency. That means Spring Boot framework is made after thinking that what are the basic configurations a developer needs to just start in a few go. Simply, if you need to make a web-based application that is built so much fast and it is easy to deploy, easy to scale, and easy to maintain. All the dependencies that are required for a developer to do this all things, Spring Boot provide it. You don't have to take care of these things. We can summarize it in a way that Spring Boot is a framework that makes it easy to build standalone applications, reduces manual setup by providing some auto configuration features, starter templates, and embedded features. These are the three main features. So you must try to catch it. These are the three important features that Spring Boot provides to you. So what are those important features? Take a moment to get it. That it reduces our manual setup. So it reduces manual setup. How? By providing auto configurations. We'll deeply understand one by one that what does it means, what is auto configuration and all. Before that, just giving you a quick intro. Second important feature, it starter template. When we head over to build our REST API, we see that we just on just few clicks, lots of things are just managed by Spring Framework. So starter templates, it will provide so many things, so many dependencies, and you don't need to create some objects. So these kind of features it will provide and you are just ready to go. You just have to think what is the exact logic. It is simply means you have to write code rather than thinking that how the background process and the deployment things work. So this is the best thing that Spring could provide. And the third important feature is embedded server. You don't have to take care about installing the servers. It will came along with the Spring Boot. So these are some Spring Boot features. So in this lecture, we are going to learn how we can create a REST API using Spring Boot. So first we can understand what is REST. Basically, REST stands for representational state transfer. Simply means whenever we are trying to hit any URL that we are using in a Google or any browser, whenever we hit any URL, some domain mappings happen, which we'll talk later that what is domain mapping, how it is configured out using DNS server. But right now you just think whenever you are trying to hit any URL, some domain mapping happen and this URL is trying to request a resource. This URL is trying to request a resource. Whenever you are trying to get some resource that is in some other servers or anywhere in database. So this kind of thing is done using API. API stands for application programming interface. So API is nothing but when one system tries to communicate with another system, we can simply do it with the help of API. So with the help of API, we can connect two systems or more than two systems, which can connect together to share the data. So there are two standards. Basically, there are two standards: REST standard, SOAP standards, and so many all. I mean, there are few more APIs, GraphQL, and few more APIs is also there. But REST API is so popular. And in this lecture, we are just differentiating between REST API and SOAP-based API. So we know REST stands for representational state transfer, and REST uses HTTP methods. So basically, there are four methods, or you can say four important methods: get, post, put, and delete. Okay. So whenever we are trying to get, the name suggests, whenever we are trying to get any information or any resource from a server. So whenever we are trying to get any resource from a server, we use get method. When we are sending some request to the server, that is post. And then when we are updating any information, right, like filling out any form in the any web page, whenever we fill any forms and click on submit, then put request is initiated. And then when we want to delete some information, then delete method is instantiated. So these, so REST API is work on HTTP method. It is very lightweight and simple to use because it does not require any XML configuration. It works on JSON method. It does not require the description, which we call web description. Like in SOAP-based API, we use web descriptions, the exact description which is used to process whatever resource we are requesting. So let's understand SOAP stand for Simple Object Access Protocol. Simple Object Access Protocol. So it is also a standard, but it is an old method of communication between system because SOAP uses XML format that is complex to understand, and whenever we are trying to do any kind of error handling, it requires a lot of time to understand what happens inside the code or what error is coming from the server. It need web server description list which describe the whole thing, whatever we are requesting and whatever the error is or the request or any data coming from the server. So that is very complex to understand and debug. It is not easy to scale also. So REST is something that is very faster and flexible. And nowadays REST API is being popularly used instead of SOAP-based API. So in this class, basically we are trying to create a REST API using a Spring Boot. To know more differences between REST and SOAP-based API, a separate video I'll create you for all. So for this class, we start creating a REST API and then we see how easy to create it using a Spring Boot application and what are the benefits Spring Boot framework provides to us. So at first, you'll have to head to the page known as Spring Initializer. This is a page where you can go and do some clicks. For example, the language you are using. Now in the project section, choose Maven. So we'll later talk about Maven. Maven is just a build tool. It provides us some dependency. What are the features that our Spring Boot is going to provide us is inside the Maven. We can add some dependencies and later on we see what are the basic features this Spring Boot is providing. So whenever we want to add any dependency and any feature that Spring Boot is providing to us, we just add it to our Maven, which is listed in the pom.xml. We'll see after installing it. Now select the Spring Boot version, whatever version you select the version that is LT long term support. Now group is nothing but just a domain name of a company in the reverse order. So in our case, we are building a demo project. So we can simply write com.demo REST API. So artifact is just the name of a package or the company you'll provide it. You can write anything just for now. So I can write REST API. So packaging is jar. Jar is nothing but a file which we download from Spring Initializer that comes with all the required dependencies and all the required things which will need to create a REST-based API or a web-based application. So everything is provided inside this jar. Now just click on add dependency and search Spring Web. So this is a dependency which is we are going to include it to make a REST API. So there are so many dependencies listed here which will use in the near future. Every dependencies have their own benefits. For example, if we use Spring Web Services, that is used for making the SOAP-based applications. For this moment of time, we are trying to create a REST API. So we can choose Spring Web. There are so many options. You can see to build a web flux, netty type of application, GraphQL, REST repositories. And then if you want to include Spring security, there are so many things that is provided by Spring Boot. These are nothing but just the features that we don't need to configure. We are simply importing it from the Spring, and rest all the things are taken care of by the Spring framework. How? Just see it. So we are just adding this Spring Web in our project. This is nothing, just a dependency which is going to be included with Maven that is in pom.xml file. We'll see after generating the jar file. So jar is nothing, just a whole bundle which we are going to create using this Spring initializer. Everything that is provided by Spring Boot is going to be in this jar file. So just generate. So it will take a time, and it is downloaded as REST API.zip. Head to the REST API and just extract it. Now, whatever you got after extracting the zip file or the jar file, just open it with any ID you want. So I am using IntelliJ IDEA. So I am opening it with IntelliJ IDEA. You can use any ID of your choice, like Eplex, Spring Toolsuit. Once it is open, then we'll talk about the structure, what Spring Boot provides. So as you can see, this is the folder that is provided by the Spring Boot. Now go to src, main, then Java, then this is our package name, and this is our application. Okay, this is the important class which we need to understand. There is a resource package where configurations related to in a static, we can add our HTML, CSS files. There are few templates also provided. In application.properties file, we can add configuration related to our database, and if you are using any logging features, we can add it here. In the test section, we have the same thing. So if you want to use Mockito or any Java framework which is based on testing, we can do it here. We can test whether our API is working fine or not. Now there is pom.xml which we are talking about. This is basically giving us all the dependency that Spring Boot provides us. Now if while developing a project, if you want to add any dependency, you need, because while creating a jar file, you may not aware of few things which we need later in your project. So it might be possible that you have to add some jar files later. So just whatever dependency you want to add, for example, if I want to add a Spring security dependency in our project, so just simply go to the URL and type Spring security Maven dependency, and whatever you get from Maven repository, you can just copy it. This dependency, and simply paste it inside dependencies tag. So simply paste it inside. So it might be possible some version error will be shown to you. So if basically Spring Boot automatically configures whatever version you are using, so you can just simply remove it so that this error might gone. So as you can see, version is already listed here. So Spring will auto configure it. So if you need any dependency in the future, you can simply add it and just reload the pom.xml to add this dependency. Okay, so just start building the REST application. These are some extra things which I am explaining to you that is not needed. Just giving a quick intro that what are the basic structure that a Spring Boot project has. Okay, fine. Now this is the main Java class file. Now there is an annotations known as @Spring Boot annotation. This is the annotation which Spring Boot uses that which class I have to execute. So which is my first class, or we can say which is the entry class. So this annotation @Spring Boot application annotation tells the execution, the Spring Boot, that this is the main class, and from this main functions we have to start running our project. For this moment of time, I don't want to explain much more of annotation in this video. So later on, I create few videos on annotations. So you can just watch it in the same playlist. Learn Spring Boot in the best, easiest way. Now, in the industry, you can try to understand. We can simply write the whole code in a single class and the execution will work. But if I talk according to the industry standards, the industry will follow a three-layer architecture. So what is this three-layer architecture? So just understand what is this three-layer architecture. Three-layer architecture is nothing but we create three things while creating API or a REST-based API. So what are the three things? So we create a controller. We create a controller that calls service, and furthermore this service calls to the repository. So what does it mean? Nothing but controller class is created for endpoints. What URL you need to hit. Everything, all the information regarding what URL, what endpoints you will have to hit in the URL is going to be written inside the controller section. Whenever you hit that URL, there is few operations is going to be listed inside the controller class. Once the URL is hit by any testing tool or any uh, browser, the controller request the service class to look into it. Now the service class has the business logic. Whatever error handling we have to do, whatever checks we need to perform, everything is written inside the service class. So service class is nothing but that is a class that holds the business logic. What exact we want to make? What are the executable steps we need to take? And after all the checks performed, it will call the repository. Repository is nothing, just a class that holds the necessary information related to our database. Everything that is related to our database, like connecting to the database, fetching information from the database, and that this repository request best back to the service class, and this service class request back to the controller. And this is how the three-layer architecture works. So we are going to create this REST API using this three-layer architecture because this is the architecture that followed by the industry. You can do the whole coding in the single class, but this is not professional and not readable as well. To make it more professional, you always try to follow a three-layer architecture. So let's see how we can create this three-layer architecture. So this is our Java class. So inside our package, let's create three more package. There is the benefit of creating this three-layer architecture. We can easy to scale our project. We can easy to maintain. We can easy to debug it. The boilerplate code is reduces. There are so many more dependency we can add into it. There are so many things we can add and easily maintain it using this three-layer architecture. So first, go to the package, right click, go to new, create three packages, name controller, then create service, then create repository, and then create three corresponding class to every package. So This is our controller.java. This is nothing but service.java and repository.java. So finally we created 3 class. So this is our first entry point or the entry class. From there only our Spring Boot project starts executing. This is a command, a method that is simply a run method that does a lot of work. Whenever this command is called, there are so many backend operations are going to perform by Spring Boot app. It means you can't even imagine that how many classes and how many objects are going to be created to just start this application, to just start this simple web-based API. Before Spring Boot, the whole lot configuration is done by the developers. So now the convention is more onto what we going to make rather than thinking what are the whole configuration is going to be done. So when we run this method, when the Spring Boot start executing, there are lots of classes and methods are going to be called in the backend to process our request. Now moving to a controller class. So this is our controller class where we are going to write some logic that is help us to create a REST API. So at first, whatever class is responsible for handling our endpoints, that is basically an API class. So for that purpose, we need to add REST controller annotation. This is nothing but an annotation that after adding at the rate REST controller, all the necessary things that is required to make the REST API is going to be handled by the Spring Boot application. So make sure to add at the rate REST controller. There are so many annotations which we'll talk further in the next video in the series. So for that moment of time, you just have to digest that REST controller is nothing but an annotations that is used to make this class a REST class which is used to head the APIs, and rest everything is going to be handled by the Spring Boot application. If you added at the rate REST controller, basically it creates the beans and whatever needed to run this class. Okay, now this is a service class where we exactly have to write the business logic. So for this moment of time, we are just returning a method. Let's say uh, create a class like get message method. Sorry, create a method. So just return whatever you want to return it to the controller, like this is our first REST based API. So this is something which we need to get from our applications. So we are creating a REST API. We are using HTTP standards. We are requesting something from our application and our application is returning something to us. That simply means. Now we have to add an annotations here as well. That is basically at the rate service annotations that tells Spring Boot to create object of this class and store it inside the IOC container. Why? Why this is required? This is required because at the rate service annotations helps Spring Boot to understand that this class is going to be used by the REST API. So whatever the necessary requirements is to call this service logic using our controller class or the REST API or whatever tool we are using. We are using browser or we are using any tool for API testing like Postman. So whatever things is required is going to be given to us using this at the rate service annotations. These are nothing but the child annotations of at the rate component. So we'll talk more about this things, these annotations in the later video. So now I'm creating simply a variable named with service because we want the object of the service class that is being created by Spring Boot. We don't have to create it. Now use at the rate auto wired annotation so that Spring Boot will create object on behalf of us. Okay, so simply we are creating a constructor and just using the object that is provided by the Spring Boot. Now we are using one more annotation, that is get mapping. So get mapping annotation, basically whatever URL we want, what is our endpoint going to be? What is the endpoint? So whatever we write it inside get mapping under double quote, this is going to be our URL simply. So now we have to just call that method of the service class. So whenever we run our Spring Boot application, we are going to run this Spring Boot application. The first, when we hit the URL, the first every necessary requirements like servers, server start, beans creating, object creation, everything is done by the Spring Boot. Then we went to browser, hit a endpoint. Once we hit that endpoint, the control will go inside this say hello method. It will, using this service object, it will call the method of this class and return this message as a part to our browser. So that is basically REST API. We are using the HTTP standard in the browser. We are hitting an endpoint, a URL, and our application is giving back a response in the form of this string. This is basically a REST API, which we earlier discussed here as well. So we are using HTTP method, few standards that is used to request a resource. So when we head to the browser and hit it, when we head to the browser and hit the URL, we are basically requesting something from our applications. That is usually happening when we are searching anything over the internet. We write the URL, some domain mapping is happening, and then the request is going to the server and this server is returning something back to us. So simply just this is our simple REST based application. Just run the application. First you need to know everything is going correct here. So once the application is started, you see the Tomcat server is started. Spring Boot is managing a lot of things, doing all the stuff for us. We didn't write anything, whatever you are saying in this context. We don't know how these things are performing. These are the backend processing that Spring Boot is working for us. That makes this application, that makes Spring Boot very easy to use, and just you are ready to code and deploy it on the server. Now the Spring Boot is started. So here is the port number, which is a default port number 8080. So this is started. This is the default port number. Okay. Go to the localhost, hit 8080 slash whatever endpoint you created in your controller class. Once you hit it, you get the message. This is our first REST base API. Okay. That is what we have written in our business logic. This is our first REST based API that is coming over here, right? So in this way, this is a very long explanation so that you can thoroughly understand what are the basic things we require and how the things work behind. So this is how you can create a simple REST based API using Spring Boot.